worthwhile, we'll wrap the briefing and we'll give copies of the entire briefing with the charts to you. If there are any questions that you want to direct to the Admiral Mack, or if you have any questions,
aren't you, this is a system where you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're going to try to keep the selective service and then at the same time establish a volunteer force. Have you costed this thing out? What about the basic theory that every man has a duty to volunteers won't provide the answer to that kind of
problem? I think the point here is that the selective service in all of the programs have always been considered to be on a standby basis, but I'd like the Admiral to direct his attention to that question.
Yes, sir. I would conceive that the study group would tackle all of these problems. First, it would try to keep in the system the requirement for patriotism and other good reasons for people to come into service. Obviously, the study system is going to cost all this out and make recommendations as to what it thinks about it. And all of these points you bring up, I think, are really within the purview of the study system to figure out and bring to the attention of Mr. Laird and the President's Commission.
Not only as far as Project Volunteer is concerned will it be a part of the study, but also the Presidential Commission, which the President will appoint.
What's the deadline that you were talking about?
Tight deadlines. What are the deadlines?
The answer is, obviously, you'd like to do this on a basis where you would like to find out more about the projected course in the future, the course of international affairs and so forth. All this would require a good deal of time. You can't wait that long. We've got to get on with it, and I wouldn't see that Mr. Laird would set an exact date on us, but would require us to do all we can as soon as we can, and rather than to come up at some late date with a total package of ideas and recommendations to give to him whatever we determine is a good recommendation whenever it comes up.
Well, first, Admiral, the first step that you have to take in moving toward any kind of a volunteer force, that first step is in the area of compensation reform. Because any study that you make will show that as far as military compensation is concerned, it does play an important part. Perhaps not the controlling part, but it is a very important part. And if we are going to move towards any kind of volunteer force, we must face up to a complete overhaul of our compensation system. And that must be done very rapidly. And we would hope that this would be one of the major parts of the budget review, and the recommendations which will be made in the budget review will cover this very important point. So the first phase will have to be finalized by the 15th of March.
As I understood the Admiral, consideration of moving to the lottery would be given high priority. Is there a possibility of moving to that before the Vietnam War ends?
Well, I think that there is a possibility of, and that should be considered. This drafting the January babies ahead of the December babies just isn't a practical way to run the draft program. And the law as currently written, I believe, must be changed, and one of the first pieces of legislation which will be sent to the Congress by the new administration will be in this area to do away with the inequities that presently exist in our Selective Service Act.
I wasn't here at the beginning, but did you foresee that this volunteer force would be able to take care of a Vietnam situation without resources?
We didn't foresee that at all, and this is one of the items that will be studied not only by the Presidential Commission, but also by Project Volunteer. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes, well, I think the briefing here indicated that it was rather unlikely that we could have supported volunteer basis the current size force we have, where we have an annual deficit of about $750,000 men. I think we are really talking about a situation short of a major emergency, and how you define major emergencies is a question.
That is something that needs to be studied, I think.
We've had a compensation study over the past 3 years, the public study. Is that scrapped in its entirety, or will parts of it be used?
Well, as you know, that was rejected by the last administration in the final weeks of the budget markup. And it was turned down by the previous administration. That proposal is currently under review by the budget study under David Packard. And there are several things that I think, I personally feel, need to be changed as far as that report is concerned to make it acceptable to the Congress and to make it acceptable to military personnel, both on active duty and retired. And I hope that those amendments will be ready and that we will give consideration to this whole matter in our budget review as far as amendments to the budget. And I'd like David Packard to comment on that.
Well, I think we can, from what we know already, we can conclude that there's going to have to be some change in the pay plan before we can really make any progress on in reducing the level of draft calls or getting to an all-volunteer army. Simple fact is that the lowest pay is just nowhere near competitive with what these young people can get going out for a job otherwise, and so they have no incentive of monetary sort to join the Army, even though they might feel inclined to do so otherwise. And you notice we've talked also about the retention factor. If we could keep more people in the service for a longer period of time, this would reduce the number we'd have to induct, provide for a more efficient utilization of the people, and there are some things in the pay bill which would encourage people to stay for a longer period of service. And so I think the study of the pay revision is a very important first step in making any progress on this whole matter of manpower.
Mr. Secretary, could you give us your philosophy of all-volunteer army, in effect, a professional army? In the past history of other nations, a professional army often has led to a man on a white horse. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that the concern which you indicate in your question is a concern that does bother me. And this is a matter that we intend to get into very thoroughly in this study, and I'm not going to prejudge Project Volunteer or the report of the President's Commission, which I understand he will soon appoint. But this concern, as expressed in your question, is one which needs to be looked at very hard and very realistically, I believe.
Sir, considering the problems you're experiencing on college campuses with the ROTC units, don't you anticipate trouble in maintaining your officer corps?
Well, I would hope that we would be able to move towards recruiting on college campuses. Some of the same people that oppose our recruiting for volunteers on the college campuses seem to be some of the same people that are supporting volunteer services. And I would hope that they would see the merit in allowing us to recruit so that we can have volunteer forces. And I think that this is most important. Now, there are certain things as far as the ROTC program is concerned that I think need study. And they will get that study under our new Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. We want to improve that program. We want to upgrade that program. But I would hope that we would be permitted and encouraged to move towards recruiting volunteers.
The disallowed credit should be allowed to maintain a unit.
The current law, as far as credit is concerned, it depends on the course levels that are established in cooperation with the Department of Defense. If you're asking about credit for a simple program of, say, a marching, I would question that. But when you get into military history and military sciences and many of the other programs that are a high-caliber program and of academic value, certainly I would favor credit for that type of program.
You take away a unit if they did not allow credit.
On what program? Now, give me the program.
Military
and,
science, something that you consider academically worthwhile.
if it is an academically worthwhile program, under the present law, of course, if it has been approved by the department in cooperation with the Department of Defense and with the college and university, credit must be given. Of course, you understand the law, and that is the current law.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I make a suggestion? Some of you may have a number of technical questions on this. Admiral Mack and Dr. Will is pleased to stay here and answer any other questions you have, but I wonder if we could let the Secretary go.
I just have one last question.
Yes.
I'd like to ask, on the
We'll
basis
have two more questions, Dan, and then we'll let Dr. Walt and Admiral Mack take over.
I was going to ask whether your latest reports from Vietnam indicate a continuing threat, serious threat of a so-called Tet offensive around Saigon and other major areas. How do you evaluate your reports today?
Well, I'm not one to make predictions on when things are going to happen or whether things are going to improve or get worse, because what I have to do as Secretary of Defense is look at the possible threat in the area. And there have been increases as far as the infiltration from the north is concerned during the last 3 months into Laos and into Cambodia. And we must be mindful of these increases in force levels in those areas. And General Abrams has assured me that he has sufficient contingency plans and sufficient force levels to take care of any possible offensive threat should one be mounted by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong.
Mr. Secretary, I was wondering if you could tell us what the Navy has told you about the Sea-Lab mishap and how soon Sea-Lab might be able to resume again.
Well, that's being looked at right now, and I wouldn't want to give you a time program on that or project the timing. This is an important program, and we're trying to get to the bottom of the mishap of yesterday to see exactly what happened. And I would not give you a time frame in which to operate based on the information that I have today.
Thank you very much. Secretary, can I get a picture of you and Mr. Packard again?
Where are the copies of those? All right. Come in just a little closer. Just a little closer. All right. One more. One more. Okay. Mr. Laird? Mike Laird.
How much more expensive will it be to operate a volunteer force under the present draft system?
Well, back in 1964 and 65, we studied that. And the answers we came up with we did not find satisfactory. The best we could do, and we hope to do better, was to bracket the possible cost for a pre-Vietnam force level between $4 and $17 billion. We had a probable cost estimate then of about $8 billion. I was the first one to emphasize that we were not happy with our ability then to get a narrow range of costs. Now, a lot of this is inevitable because we have to forecast the kind of economy we're going to be living in. Obviously, the higher the
level of civilian competition, the more we might have to pay. But other parts of the problem were simply a lack of enough data. We hope to get more and to get the best advice we can and zeroing in on the best estimates we can in this area.
The other question that arose is, are you going to be able to get quality volunteers? There are, particularly among some Southern congressmen and senators, saying that you will have an army that will be predominantly black.
Well, the answer here is, first of all, that the objective of the study and the assumptions underlying it are that we must get the quality needed to do the job. I think the image of an all-black force, as President Nixon said in his address on the subject, is just totally far-fetched. The numbers just don't add up that way. He mentioned that if even every young man who was Negro and who was qualified volunteered each year, in relation to the size force we have, we'd still have a maximum theoretical possibility of 25% Negro, and that is totally unrealistic as even a possibility. Now, as far as quality, we do believe that this will take a great deal of imaginative effort in all kinds of directions. Now, quality should not be, however, defined as synonymous with test scores or any other single criterion we may be using. We hope to study other ways of finding high-quality, high-potential people as part of the research we'll be doing.
Have we ever used a lottery system before, and when? And isn't this similar to something that's in use in some European countries?
Well, the lottery was used both at the beginning of World War I and at the beginning of World War II. That time, the problem was very different. It was the problem of initial selection for a large mass mobilization where eventually nearly all the qualified and available men were used. When the mobilization reached that point, the lottery really served no useful purpose. We're now thinking of a lottery under hoped-for peacetime conditions where year after year only a small fraction of the potentially available men will be used. Currently, a lottery system we know is being used in Australia. It was used recently in Germany, and I think there are other countries which use it.
Dr. Will, could you explain in a little more detail how this January to December babies problem works? That is, why you're more likely to be inducted if you're born
Well,
first.
this is if one were to move to what we call a modified age class system, one which limited the range of uncertainty for 1 year's time. Under the law, as amended, the selective service system has to order men for induction in order of age, oldest man first. They can do that within a broad group such as 19 to 25 or within a given age group. Therefore, they could take the oldest men who are age 19 first. As a practical administrative matter, in order to operate the system, the selective service people have advised us the only practical way to do it is if you in fact have a pool, normally at the beginning of a year's time, of men who are in a particular age class or who are constructively that age. That is, college graduates who might be 22, but for this purpose are called constructive 19-year-olds. Now, if you in fact take oldest men first from a fixed age group for a year's time, the effect of that constraint is that they would be the January boys as against the December boys, or any other arbitrary calendar sequence that you might arrive at, but they still be the oldest men, you see.
I covered this on the Hill. As the House Armed Service Committee's plan envisioned it, it would be a monthly thing. And the monthly call would take the ones about to turn 20 in each month, and it would be spread around the year. But you say the selective service system does not deem that to be feasible?
Well, in various studies of the various options available to move to this age class system, since the amendments were passed, and there were numerous attempts to game options on this, it is my recollection that the Director of Selective Service felt that this moving system would not be administratively feasible and would, in addition, I think, be quite confusing to young men.
So, in other words, when we speak, the Secretary Laird spoke about he needs some modifications in the current authority. I gather, I couldn't get the question in, that he's thinking about more of a pure lottery he wants authorized, whether or not you use it now or use it later.
I assume so.
Is it possible, sir, to complete
the compensation part of the study in time to submit a legislative proposal to Congress by the 1st of July? Well, let me answer that one. Yes, it is, and we're proceeding as fast as we can to do such a thing. Possible. Yes. In other words, there's a possibility then of a new form of compensation to replace 12.5% across the board military pay raise. Well, I wouldn't use the phrase to replace it. It would be a plan presented which would be in conjunction with that. But the forwarding of such a plan can be done quickly and very easily as soon as it's decided upon and studied here and sent over. It's just a matter of days to send it over there. The question of hearings and passage of it is something else again.
Doctor, what is your answer to the man on the white horse argument against professional life?
I think the answer lies in just comparing the situation of different countries in the world today or in the recent past. We have volunteer forces today in countries such as the United Kingdom and Canada, and I don't see any man on the white horse there. We have conscript forces in many countries which have been associated with military dictatorships and men on white horse. Studies which we had done for us in recent years indicate no particular correlation between a, quote, professional force in the sense of a non-conscript force and the threat of military dictatorship. I think the strength of our democratic institutions, the philosophy underlying those who run the military force and our civilian government are far more important.
I'll give you a little bit of a military addendum to that, Bill. I think one of the things that this study group would do would be to find ways that you would avoid that. And some of them can be very simple. That is, you concentrate on the ROTC, which gives you a high civilian flavor to your officer input. You might, for instance, in the housing area, instead of having housing compounds built all in one area, try to go to leasing individual houses around the community so that the enlisted men and officers would not become a clique or a compound, would become part of the civilian group. You might go so far as to say, well, send them ashore in civilian clothes or out all posted in civilian clothes. Make them part.
Like NCOs at the officers' clubs, that sort of thing?
No, I wouldn't say you do that, but you put them out in the civilian economy and have them be part of the community. These are just things that the study commission, or the study group rather, would look into, and every aspect of things that could be done to avoid that sort of thing.
I should emphasize, too, that there's a sort of naive notion that a, quote, volunteer force means a force in which people sign up at age 18 or 22 and all of them, or nearly all of them, continue through their full working life. This just wouldn't be so. Nobody envisages that. Young men try out different jobs for size, whether civilian or military. You will continue to have a large number of men who will enlist for a tour of duty and then will separate. We'd want to reduce it, but that's just a fact of life. Secondly, a typical military career is 20-odd years. One of the things which any intelligent officer enlisted man does is think ahead to his second career as a civilian. So there's always a linkage and back and forth which will go on rather than an isolated community.
Well, you'd end up with an awful old army, too, wouldn't you?
That's right. We wouldn't want. Obviously, we couldn't operate a force which would have too little turnover.
Is the thinking that more can be done by way of giving incentives to people who already are servicemen to recruit their friends, you know, in the way of leave, etc.?
Well, some of that is being done by recruiters. In other words, when men are on leave, they're often encouraged to sign up some of their buddies, and obviously we'll look at every possibility along these lines.
How long do you think the study will take?
That's, well, what we envisage, I think, is that some parts of the study, certainly those related to immediate actions, will wrap up quite quickly. Other areas will require additional research, additional surveys, and I don't want to forecast a terminal date, but I don't see a full study being completed in a year's, much less than a year's time. It may take longer.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all.